Veronica was 22 years old, beautiful, charming, and well-behaved. She was the type of daughter every mother would dream of, yet her own mother, Mrs. Grace, didn't seem to like her. Mrs. Grace had high expectations for Veronica, but since she didn't behave the way her mother wanted, she was constantly overlooked and even hated. Veronica's younger sister, Mary, was just 16, but she was very different. Mary had a way of making money, though it wasn't always honest. She stole, slept with different men, and danced in clubs to earn cash. Mrs. Grace favored Mary because of this. She would give her money, gifts, and perfumes whenever she returned home and preferred spending time with her, as Mary always seemed to have a way of solving their financial problems, even if it meant doing things that were wrong. Their father, Mr. Jacobs, was growing tired of the situation. He was fed up with how his wife was encouraging Mary to keep up her questionable ways. One day, in frustration, he shouted at Mrs. Grace, "I've told you over and over again to stop teaching Mary these bad ways to get rich. Don't say I didn't warn you. Get out of here. Who are you even warning?" Mrs. Grace snapped, cutting her husband off. It had been 5 years since Veronica graduated from secondary school, and her dream of becoming a medical doctor seemed as far away as ever. She had tried to register for JAM 3 times from the money she sacked, but each time the exam date approached, her mother would come up with some excuse to stop her from going. "Do you really think you'll succeed in that school? You, a poor, good-for-nothing daughter. Try leaving this house, and I'll make sure you regret it," Mrs. Grace would say. "Anyway, to avoid being a bad mother, go fill this gallon, head to the market, and buy food for me. If you finish in time, then you can go." After everything, Veronica will rush to the place she keeps her money, but she wouldn't find it. Mr. Jacobs, though clearly upset, was too controlled by his wife to do much more than get angry and offer a few words of comfort to Veronica. Mary, her mother's favorite, just graduated from secondary education. But she is not ready to further her education or even learn a skill. She enjoyed making cool cash in different bad ways. Mary was lying on the couch, scrolling through her phone, laughing at something only she found funny. She looked like someone with no worries. Veronica sat beside her, holding a folded JAM form she hadn't been able to submit. "Mary, I know I'm not your mother, but can we talk?" she said softly. Mary barely looked up. "About what now?" "This life you're living, stealing, jumping from man to man. You're better than this. Why not get a JAM form or even learn tailoring? Just something different." Mary blinked slowly, then smirked. "Look at you. 5 years at home, nothing to show. No school, no job, not even a boyfriend. And you want to advise me?" Then came the slap. Hot. Hard. Fast. Veronica staggered. Her mother stood behind her, eyes full of fire. "How dare you talk to Mary like that? Since you graduated, what have you done for me?" "Nothing. You eat my food and run your mouth." "Mama," she whispered, "how can I do anything when you've never allowed me to even try? You hide my JAM money. You never let me learn a skill. I clean this house. I go to the farm." "But Mary." "Enough," her mother shouted. "If I were you, I'd beg your sister to teach me her ways. That your nonsense dream of becoming a doctor. Not in my lifetime." "Mum, how am I supposed to make money when you've stopped me from chasing my dreams? You've never even allowed me to learn a skill. Every day, I sweep, cook, work on the farm, basically, I do everything in this house. But then there's Mary, who can't even lift a finger to help me. What you're doing is wrong. Mama, this isn't fair. You haven't seen anything yet. If I were you, I'd ask my younger sister to teach me something useful. As for that foolish dream of yours to study something I don't even understand at the university, it won't happen unless I'm not alive. Now, get out of here before I do something you'll regret." One hot afternoon, Mrs. Grace shouted, "Veronica, pick that basket and head to the farm. Or do you want us to die of hunger?" She sighed quietly, looking down at her tired feet. "Mama, I just finished cooking." Mrs. Grace didn't even let her finish. She stormed into the room, eyes blazing. "And so, do you want a medal for cooking? I said, go. No point arguing. Veronica reached for the old basket resting near the door, her hands shaking from exhaustion. She stepped outside, squinting at the harsh sun. The dry ground burned beneath her feet as she began the long walk toward the farm, each step heavier than the last. She didn't complain. She never did. But her heart was tired. The sun beat down on Veronica as she walked slowly along the dirt path. Her shoulders ached, and the basket she carried felt heavier with every step. The heat was unbearable, but it wasn't the sun that made her heart feel heavy, it was the weight of her mother's words, always reminding her of how useless she was. "You're nothing. You'll never amount to anything." She had heard those words for years, and today, they stung more than ever. She was halfway home when something strange caught her eye. There, just off the path, a figure lay motionless in the tall grass. At first, she thought it was a sack of something, maybe a discarded piece of cloth. But as she approached, her heart skipped a beat. It was a man. His clothes were torn, and his skin was pale, almost ashen. Sweat glistened on his forehead, his breathing shallow and uneven. Veronica's first instinct was to look around, no one else was in sight. She swallowed hard, pushing the fear down, and dropped her basket to the ground. "Hey," she said softly, kneeling beside him. "Are you okay?" There was no response. His chest rose and fell with labored breaths, but that was all. She pressed her fingers to his neck, feeling for a pulse. It was faint, barely there, but it was enough. He was alive. Her heart pounded in her chest. She couldn't leave him here. She reached down, trying to lift him, but his weight was too much. She shifted her stance, gritting her teeth, and finally managed to hoist him up, one arm draped across her shoulders. He felt like dead weight, his body limp against hers, but she didn't stop. She couldn't. Each step was a battle. The path felt longer, the ground hotter, but Veronica kept going, her thoughts fixed on one thing, getting him home. When she finally reached her house, the sky had started to darken. Mrs. Grace was sitting outside, fanning herself with a piece of cloth, her gaze shifting over to Veronica as she approached. The moment she saw the stranger, her lips curled in a familiar scowl. "What are you doing?" Mrs. Grace's voice was sharp, her eyes narrowing. She looked from Veronica to the man. "Who's this?" Veronica barely had the energy to respond. "He's hurt," she said, her voice low, almost pleading. "I found him by the stream. He needs help." Mrs. Grace stood up slowly, crossing her arms, clearly not convinced. "A stranger? You bring a stranger into my house? What if he's some kind of thief or troublemaker?" Veronica ignored her mother's words and gently helped the man inside. "Mrs. Grace followed them, muttering under her breath, but said nothing more as Veronica laid the man down on the small cot by the wall. She moved quickly, checking his wounds, her hands steady despite the knot in her stomach. His breathing was steady now, but he still hadn't opened his eyes. Veronica soaked a cloth with water and wiped the dirt from his face, her movements careful, as if he might break under her touch. As she worked, she couldn't help but notice how striking he looked, even in his weak state. His features were sharp, his jaw strong, but there was something softer in the way he lay there, vulnerable, that made Veronica pause for a moment. She hadn't realized how much she'd been holding her breath until it escaped her in a soft exhale. When she was finished, she sat beside him, her heart still racing. She wasn't sure what she had expected, but not this. By the time she looked up again, the man's eyes were open, just slightly. They flickered, focusing on the room, the ceiling, then finally meeting her gaze. His lips parted, but it was clear he was struggling to find the strength to speak. Where am I?" His voice was weak, barely above a whisper. "You're safe," Veronica said, her voice more gentle than she intended. "I found you by the stream. You were unconscious." He blinked, as if processing the words, his eyes searching her face. He opened his mouth again, but no words came out. Instead, his gaze traveled down to his own hands, and then back to her. Before Veronica could say anything else, the door creaked open. Mrs. Grace entered the room, her face tight with suspicion as she took in the scene. "Who's this?" she demanded, her tone flat. Veronica stood up, her hands shaking slightly. She glanced between her mother and the stranger, unsure of what to say. The man, however, broke the silence. His voice was stronger now, though still rough. "I'm not just anyone," he said, his gaze steady, locking with Mrs. Grace's. "You should get to know me." Mrs. Grace frowned, clearly unimpressed. "And why should I care who you are?" The man's lips curled into a small, almost imperceptible smile. "Because I can change things for you. But not in the way you think." Veronica felt her pulse quicken at his words. Something in his tone, something in his presence, made her realize that this wasn't just an ordinary man. There was something more to him. Something that would shift the very fabric of her life. But she didn't understand yet. No one could have. And as she stood there, looking from the man to her mother, Veronica felt it, the unmistakable sense that her life had just taken a turn she never saw coming. Veronica stood frozen in place as the man's words hung in the air. Her mother's narrowed eyes met the stranger's, both of them sizing each other up. Veronica wanted to say something, to explain, but the words got caught in her throat. Her mother's harsh tone cut through the quiet room. "So what? You're some rich man who thinks he can just wander into a poor village and have people cater to him?" Mrs. Grace sneered. "If you have money, why don't you go back to wherever you came from and leave us in peace?" The man sat up slowly, his eyes not leaving Mrs. Grace's. There was a quiet strength in his gaze, a certainty that seemed out of place for someone who had just been near death's door. He wasn't like anyone Veronica had met before. "I never asked for help," he said, his voice calm but firm. "But sometimes life has a way of changing things." He looked directly at Veronica. "You were kind to me, even when you didn't know who I was." Veronica could feel her heart thumping in her chest as his words settled into her. She didn't know what to make of him. He wasn't like the other villagers who came and went. He wasn't like anyone she had ever met. Mrs. Grace sniffed, her arms crossed tightly. "Kindness doesn't pay the bills," she muttered, clearly dismissing him. But Veronica didn't hear her mother. She couldn't take her eyes off the man who had now fully sat up. His posture was confident, and although he was weak, there was something commanding about him that sent a strange chill down her spine. His eyes glimmered with something she couldn't quite place, something beyond exhaustion. "I'm not here to cause trouble," he continued, his gaze shifting back to Mrs. Grace. "I'm just a man who's been through a lot. But for the moment, I need to rest." Mrs. Grace didn't reply. Instead, she turned on her heel and stormed out of the room, muttering under her breath. Veronica stood there, unsure of what to say, of what to feel. The tension in the room was thick, but she couldn't shake the nagging feeling that something had changed in her life. The man looked at her again, this time with a softer expression. "Thank you," he said, his voice almost a whisper. Veronica nodded, unsure of how to respond. "You should rest," she said quietly, her voice trembling slightly. "I'll bring you some water." She moved quickly to fetch a cup of water, her mind racing. Who was this man? And why did he seem so different? When she returned, she found him sitting up, leaning against the wall, his eyes closed. He took the water from her hand, his fingers brushing hers for a brief moment. The contact sent a strange, inexplicable jolt through her body, and she quickly pulled her hand back, embarrassed. "I don't know who you are," she said, her voice soft, "but thank you for not leaving. Most people wouldn't have bothered." The man smiled faintly, but it was a smile full of mystery, as if he were holding back a secret. "You saved my life," he said. "And sometimes, people like you are the ones who end up saving more than they know." Veronica didn't understand what he meant, but she felt a strange connection to him. The way he spoke, with such conviction and warmth, made her feel like he was someone important. Yet, in this moment, he was just a man, vulnerable, fragile, someone who had been saved by a girl who had nothing but her kindness to give. As Veronica sat beside him, her mind wandered to the future, to the world beyond this small, dusty village. She had always dreamed of something more, but her dreams had been crushed by her mother's words, by the never-ending chores that consumed her life. She had always felt like there was more to her life than this, but she had never imagined that someone like this man, who seemed to have everything, would cross her path. What if this was a sign? What if this was her chance? Hours passed, and the man grew stronger. By the time the sun set, He was sitting upright with a little more energy. His once pale face had color again, and his movements were steadier. "I'll be leaving soon," he said, his voice low. "But I'll never forget what you've done for me." Veronica nodded, a feeling of loss already beginning to settle in her chest. She wasn't ready to say goodbye. Not to him. Just then, Mrs. Grace burst into the room, her face twisted in anger. "You're leaving," she snapped, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "And you think you'll just walk away after taking up space in my house? You owe us something for this." The man turned to her, his eyes calm but unyielding. "I don't owe you anything. But I won't forget the kindness your daughter showed me." Veronica felt a strange mixture of emotions as she watched her mother. Mrs. Grace wasn't the kind of woman who would ever appreciate kindness unless it was tied to something material. And the man, he wasn't like the men who walked into their lives, used them, and left. He seemed different. "I didn't ask for anything in return," Veronica said, her voice firm. She looked at the man and added, "But if you can help, I'd ask for one thing. Help me get out of here. Help me become something more than what this life has allowed me to be." The man looked at her, a long silence stretching between them. Then, slowly, he nodded. "I'll help you," he said quietly, his voice steady. "But it will be more than just getting out of here. It will be the beginning of something you never expected." Veronica's heart skipped a beat. She had no idea what this man's words meant, but one thing was clear, her life was about to change. She had rescued him, and in return, he was about to give her the chance of a lifetime. The days that followed felt strange to Veronica. The air in the house was heavier, her mother's gaze sharper. Mrs. Grace kept quiet for the most part, but every now and then, she'd throw a scornful look at Veronica, as if blaming her for something that hadn't even happened yet. Veronica felt restless, like something big was on the horizon. But she couldn't figure out what. Then, one morning, she found herself holding a letter that would change everything. Her hands shook as she read the words. The scholarship. The one Daniel had promised. It was real. Before she could even process it, Mrs. Grace snatched the letter from her hands. "What is this nonsense?" she spat. "Do you think we're stupid?" Veronica stood there, frozen, her heart racing. Her mother's words didn't make sense. She's going to tear it up. She won't let me go. She never lets me do anything. Mrs. Grace's eyes were blazing as she stared at the letter. "You're not going anywhere. This is a waste. You'll stay here, where you belong. With me." Veronica's chest tightened. She had always obeyed. Always done what her mother asked, even when it hurt. But something inside her snapped. She couldn't live like this anymore. Not when her dreams were right in front of her. "I'm going," Veronica said, her voice steady, though her hands trembled. "I'm not staying here. I want more. I've always wanted more." Mrs. Grace's face went pale with fury, but Veronica wasn't afraid anymore. She took the letter from her mother's hand and walked out the door, her heart thumping in her chest. Weeks later, Veronica paid a visit to the elderly man she had rescued. To her surprise, he turned out to be a billionaire CEO. His son, Daniel, welcomed her warmly. It was their first time meeting. "Please, have a seat," Daniel said, motioning to a nearby chair. "Wait here for a moment." He stepped away briefly, then returned and handed her an envelope. "Take this," he said. "It's a check for 5 million naira and a full scholarship to study your dream course at any level, anywhere in the world." Veronica was stunned. She could hardly find the words to speak. Daniel smiled and added, "One more thing, never hesitate to reach out if you need anything. People like you are rare and valuable. I can't imagine what would have happened if you hadn't been there. You saved a total stranger, my father." The old man looked at her, his expression serious. "I told you I'd help you. But I didn't just mean with only the scholarship and the money. I meant with your life. What you want, what you need. Veronica, you've got potential. Don't waste it." Veronica's thoughts raced. What did he mean? But before she could ask, he added, "I don't expect anything from you. But I see something in you that others don't. You've got a future ahead of you, Veronica. Don't let anyone, especially your mother, hold you back." Months later, Veronica was sitting in her dorm room at the university, looking out the window at a world that felt so different from the one she had known. She was studying, really studying, for the first time in her life. Her mind was opening to ideas and opportunities she had never imagined. It felt like she was living someone else's life, like she had stepped into a dream. But even as she thrived in this new world, there was always a part of her that wondered about Daniel. He'd kept his word, making sure she had everything she needed to succeed. But she didn't know why. He didn't ask for anything in return. He had just helped her. No strings attached. Or so it seemed. Thank you very much for watching. Please subscribe, comment your thoughts and share. Want part 2 where we shall unveil what happened to Mary, Veronica's younger sister, and her wicked mother? Type part 2 and I will drop it tomorrow evening. God bless you.